Welcome everyone. Recognize quite a few familiar names and look forward to having some good discussion with folks that I don't know. And yeah, I'd like to also on tonight we have the Northwest Tax Law team leader Keith Krajewski is also going to be joining us. Keith is the supervisor of the Northwest Tax Law team, which I'm a part of, which basically encompasses everything from Ashland down to Trempealeau counties and everything west, which is about 17 counties. And that also fits pretty closely with Lauren's territory as well, which she covers. So welcome everyone. I'm going to turn my video off and start sharing the screen here. All right. Can everybody see that? Is that on, Lauren? That looking good? All right. So what we're going to talk about tonight, the main things we want to talk about is basically the steps that you need to do to complete your mandatory harvest. We're going to talk about where to locate the forestry professionals that can assist with this. We're going to talk about the different roles that each of the people involved play. We're going to talk about some keys to a successful timber harvest. And then lastly, we're going to go through where you can find some more in-depth information regarding timber sales and timber sale contracts. So these things do take time. Many of you have just received either your first letter or potentially your second practice due letter. So when you look at where we're at and basically what the expectation is, basically we want to keep things moving forward and show that we're moving to get these things done. As I mentioned, we all realize these things do take time. Typically 2 to 3 years isn't that uncommon from when you get this first letter, kind of starting the process to actually seeing that all the way through and completed. There's a lot of wild cards with logging, weather, logger availability, markets, and we understand that. So the main thing is that you're staying, the main thing to stay in compliance is you keep things moving forward and trying to get this practice accomplished. So if we look, basically many of you on this meeting are right here. You just received this letter, you have a practice due, and basically the next step where we want to get to is getting services accepted. What we mean by that is getting either a service agreement or timber sale contract in place with a forestry professional. After that happens, it's good to notify your tax law forestry specialist in the appropriate counties and let them know that you have services accepted, because then they can move you from that practice due list and mark you down as having services accepted. The next step, should just back up here real quick. The next step after having services accepted is we do want to get a cutting notice in place. And once we get a cutting notice in place, that's really when the job becomes active. So that's something that working with a forestry professional that can help you get that cutting notice in place. We got to have a cutting notice in place and plugged into the system before any logging can happen. And then lastly is just filing the cutting report, basically the volumes that were harvested by species and product. And I'll show you an example form of that later on in this presentation. So step one, find your MFL plan and review it. For any of you that do not have a copy of your MFL plan, definitely let me know. You can either respond in the chat box or email me afterwards. I'd be happy to get you a copy of that. But very important to review your plan. Maybe maybe even take a walk through the property yourself if you have interest in that, looking at what's being prescribed, and really see if that's still what fits your goals and objectives, and what you want to see done on the property. We do realize that many a times these lands were already enrolled in the program, perhaps before you purchased it, and so maybe your goals and objectives are different than the previous owner. So good idea to go through that, kind of review everything, and really step one is just looking over that. Also, having your plan handy will be helpful for any forestry professional that you're working with. That would be helpful for them to see that, so they have a map and kind of know what they're looking at when they come out. But this really keeps us on task, and helps us manage and the property, and it's easy to become complacent when we don't have a plan. So that's really the importance of having it as just a basic roadmap to keep us on task and notify us when management is needed. So why do we need to do a timber sale? Well, many of you are enrolled in the managed forest law or forest crop law programs, and this is part of your obligation being in the program. Actually, right in state statute, the production of future forest crops is part of the state statute. So this is a very important part of the program, and it really does support our forest industry in the state of Wisconsin, which is number 2 to agriculture in our economy in the state. So it does play a very big role keeping the wood products on the market, keeping our forest industry strong in the state. So and then also, the other reasons why we harvest is just keeping things healthy and sustainable. Harvesting overstock trees, mature trees, keeping everything, and that is the ultimate goal, is healthy, sustainable forests for the future. Benefits of a timber harvest, many benefits included, obviously income from the timber sales. In many cases, there is some income to be generated for the landowner. And in some cases, in particular here in Western Wisconsin, we do struggle getting some of these smaller jobs completed, and it may not be a lot of revenue, or may even be a break-even deal, but in many cases, there is some income to be generated. Wildlife management and forestry really go hand in hand. So it in many ways improves wildlife habitat for all different critters of wildlife. So doing forestry definitely enhances that, and also just access to the property. Think of logging roads, walking trails. Really does improve the recreational opportunities on the property, and aesthetics, improving aesthetics. Cleaning up the dead, downed, diseased trees, keeping trees healthy, vigorous, young forests. Definitely makes it more aesthetically pleasing. So step 2. So first you found your plan. Step 2, really suggest working with a cooperating forester. Cooperating foresters signed an agreement with the state of Wisconsin to practice sound forest management on MFL and non-MFL lands. And these folks really are beneficial to landowners in completing sound forestry. They do have annual requirements to the state. They have to do continuing education credits. They do have to file stumpage value reports and accomplishment reports with the DNR. But yeah, both industrial and private foresters can be in this group of cooperating foresters, but really can help you get your timber sale established. Going through all the paperwork, as I mentioned before, the MFL cutting notices, filing the reports, finding the contractors to do the job, and writing those timber sale contracts, getting that in writing. And and probably the most important, one of the most important things is the on-site administration, actually being out on the job while things are getting cut. This is where, it's very important to have some eyes on the ground and make sure everything's being implemented properly, and catch anything, if there are any issues, trying to catch those early on rather than waiting till the end of the project. Cooperating foresters can also ground truth your practice, which is a good idea to get somebody out to look at your practice. I mentioned before, feel free to walk out there yourself, look at it, get your thoughts on it, but also to have a professional forester come out and look to make sure, in fact, that what's being scheduled is in fact still needed on the ground. So where do you find the forestry, cooperating foresters and other foresters for that matter? On the Wisconsin DNR website, if you look on the top of this site here, there's a link to this site. There's a forestry assistance locator. This tool is very handy for finding foresters throughout the state. You simply scroll down to the county that your land is located, and then you can select the forester type. Down below, you'll see there is a cooperating forester tab and also a DNR tax law forestry specialist as well. So very useful when looking for cooperating foresters. You can even go further down and query through what services the cooperating foresters provide. For example, if you were looking for a certified plan writer to write an MFL plan, there is a tab underneath the cooperating forester tab where you could click just certified plan writers, and then that would pull up all the foresters that have those credentials to write a MFL plan for you. So very good tool for finding cooperating foresters and tax law foresters throughout the state. So sustainable forest management really does rest on a three-legged stool, between the landowner, the timber producer, so the actual logger, timber producer out implementing the practice, and then the forestry professionals that are helping assist with the sale and get everything taken care of. Communication between all three of these is vital, and if any of these are missing, whereas one of these isn't in the loop on what's going on, is really when troubles can arise. So really keeping the open communication between all three, the landowner, the timber producer, forestry professionals, all being on the same page so everybody knows what's going on, really does set yourself up for a successful timber sale. So landowners' roles, I've kind of alluded to some of this already with talking about the continuum of remaining in compliance and what you need to do, but really the staying on task and timely establishment of the mandatory practices is a crucial role of the landowner. Really, we should strive to have services accepted within the year the practice is scheduled. So there again, what I mean by that, having a service agreement or timber sale contract in place before, no later than the year that practice was scheduled. And then really the landowner's responsibility is ensuring that the county cutting notices and Wisconsin DNR cutting notices are filed before any logging starts. Here again, working with a cooperating forester, forestry professional, they can help assist with this paperwork. And then really making sure that the practices are being implemented as prescribed on that cutting notice and the plan. It really does come back on the landowner. So if there are any issues with the sale and what's done, that would come back on the landowner. So that's the importance also of having a contract in place to protect yourself and ensure that things are being implemented properly. And then lastly, as I mentioned, filing the volumes that were cut. And this really notifies the tax law forestry specialist that the sale is completed and everything can be closed out MFL plan updated at that point. So timber producers' roles. This really is where the rubber meets the road. These are the folks that are out actually implementing the practice, and this really can be where a lot of the troubles can happen as well. So it's very important that the timber producers are implementing the practice properly and fulfilling the MFL management plan, and really making sure. The other thing too is making sure we have the right timber producer on the right project, the right equipment mix on the right job. There's all kinds of different pieces of logging equipment and stuff, and really trying to make sure we have a good fit and a good producer that can complete the practice as prescribed. Here again, this is where having a cooperating forester or forestry professional can really help pick that right person and make sure that we get the job done properly. And then administration, checking on these jobs while they're active. You definitely want to give these folks space when they're out there operating. At the same time, it is good to show some presence, being out there checking on things and making sure things are being done properly. So does anybody, I'll just pause here for a minute, kind of went through a lot of information. Does anybody have any questions at this point? If not, no big deal. We'll keep going too. We'll got a lot of time at the end too to ask questions and hopefully have some good discussions. So, all right, I'll just keep rolling then. I mentioned this multiple times too, getting something in writing, step 3. Really is good to have a good service agreement and timber sale contract to both get these in writing. It really holds folks more accountable when stuff is in writing. Not to say a verbal contract can't be done, but when you have something in writing with a start date, end date, it just seems to keep people more accountable and keep things moving forward. So definitely suggest getting something in writing. Another important thing with the contracts is keep in mind if there is a breach in the contract in any way, you can shut down that operation until things are satisfied. And really, this is important too, to not only have a good contract, but make sure all parties are following that contract, because as I mentioned earlier, it's easier to fix problems when they're small, when the equipment is still on the job, rather than waiting till the end and when stuff may have snowballed and potentially the logger is not on the job anymore, trying to get someone back. So just mention that. Very important not only have a good contract, but also make sure all parties are following it. At the end, towards the end of this presentation, I will go through, there's some really good UW extension information on timber sale contracts and there's a link that will go send you to the UW extension website to explore more of this timber sale contract information. But a lot of information, and it is really good to get make sure you get something in writing. Also, I believe Lauren sent you, there is a UW extension and WOA sample contract that was sent out as a handout. That's a good starting point, a good tool to start with when it comes to timber sale contracts. So step 4, contact your tax law forestry specialist. This would be myself and others throughout the state. Really our role is to help educate you to make informed decisions, and this really is more of a facilitative role, and we're here to help in this process. We're not out doing the implementation of the practice, marking the timber or any of that, but we can really help get that information to you so you can make an informed decision. We also review the cutting notices and reports. We monitor some of the active sales and some of the recently harvested timber sales. I will note on here that we, when we monitor sales, there is a fine line as far as getting into sale administration. We, as DNR foresters, cannot get into administrating contracts and such. And there again, that's where having a cooperating forester working as your agent can really help with that. But we do look to make sure that the practices were implemented properly. Sometimes this is after the sale, months after. And then we also get involved with assisting forestry professionals and timber producers when there's questions. Sometimes we have management questions that pop up or other things that arise, and really working together with our partners and putting our heads together, make sure everyone's on the same page, and really is a role that we play. So as I mentioned before, if any of you are in other counties outside of Dunn, St. Croix, Pierce, definitely get to know your tax law forestry specialist. And if you don't know who that is, go to the forestry assistance locator and type in your county, and you can find out who that forester is. But anytime, along this process, feel free to reach out to myself or other tax law forestry specialists throughout the state to get your questions answered. So step 5, filing the MFL cutting notice and the county cutting notice. The county cutting notice is on the left-hand picture here, probably pretty small for most of you see. Really simple on this. Basically, it's just the legal description, landowner's name, PIN number. Basically, all the county notice is checking is make sure that there aren't any delinquent taxes on the land. So that's a pretty easy one to get filled out. On the right-hand side of the screen here is the MFL cutting notice. This is much more involved. It has a lot of different information, endangered resources, water quality concerns, archaeological, historical resources, soil conservation practices. And then on the second page of it is really, getting into the details of the cutting prescription, exactly what's being cut on the property, paired with a map showing which areas of the property are being cut. Really, there needs to be, enough information on that notice to be able to read it and clearly understand what's going on that property and see the map on where that corresponds with on the property. So it can get quite involved, and there again, this is where having a forestry professional or a cooperating forester can help fill these cutting notices out. I was going to mention on the cutting notice too, when it comes time to sign off on it, there is a tab on there where it asks for DNR approval authority or not. If you want DNR approval authority, make sure that you check that box. In some circumstances, the DNR has to approve it regardless. If you're working with a cooperating forester or a forester that has the expertise and years of service, they might check that there is no approval authority. So if you want DNR approval authority, just make sure that you check that box, which will be right by the signature page. And actually you would initial that box, putting in your initials. So step 6, submitting the MFL cutting report. This is after everything would be completed. And mention this, we need to report the species and product. And this will close out the timber sale and then send this to the tax law forestry specialist. I will note on this, there is no longer yield tax associated with this. That was abolished in 2017. But however, we still do need to report the volumes by product and species. It's kind of nice now this form has been revised. It's just total volume. It used to be by legal description by 40. Now it's just total volume on that sale. So that simplified that some. And if you have any questions filling that out, you can contact the tax law forestry specialist. But that form will eventually go to them, and that lets the tax law forestry specialist know the sale's been completed, and the plan needs to be updated and close it out the sale. So, all right, went through that. Anybody have any questions with that information?
Nothing in the chat, Matt.
Okay. We'll keep rolling here then. All right, keys to a successful timber sale. I don't know if anybody's seen this document. This is later on in this presentation, I'll show you where to find it. I believe Lauren put in a link to this publication, but this is a really good publication. I highly suggest looking through this. You can get it online. Like I say, the link will be following in a later slide here, but we're just going to go through step by step, kind of a cliff note version of this, but strongly suggest reading through this document. A lot of good stuff. So step one, marking the boundaries and designating the trees to be cut. As I mentioned before, making sure everybody's on the same page, being transparent on things by having either the trees to be cut or the trees to be left, designated or marked. It really is clear for everybody to compare apples to apples. It can get confusing, when the trees aren't marked, and perhaps the timber producer is looking at it from one angle, the landowner's looking at it from a different angle, and then the tax law forestry specialist may be different. So just keeping everybody on the same page, it really does, it's a clean way to ensure that everybody is communicating. Marking boundaries, very important regarding timber trespass concerns. Highly suggest on our state timber sales, we actually notify anytime we're cutting up to a boundary, we notify the adjacent owner well in advance, and we make sure that everybody's in agreement with said line. Many of the foresters, aren't necessarily trained surveyors. However, there is a lot of good information, and they can get pretty close when establishing boundaries, but it is good to do your homework, and much easier to kind of lay that out on the front end, especially if you have any inkling that there may be issues with the boundary. It can be helpful just to address that on the front end rather than waiting till the trees are cut. So very important. Appraising the value of the trees, no different than if you're selling a vehicle. Right, look at Kelley Blue Book, an idea what that vehicle is worth. Pretty hard to sell stuff when you have no idea what the ballpark price would be. And this again is really value working with a cooperating forester who can estimate that volume, at least get in a ballpark idea what's out there, and put a rough value of what that timber could be worth. Very, very helpful to do that. Locate the roads, trails, and landings. This is very, very important. Here again, what kind of logging operation do you have? These pictures, if you look at the middle picture, that would be a picture was taken in Buffalo County. That's a cut to length, or excuse me, a whole tree operation where they're actually pulling it out. I know it's a small picture, but they're pulling out with a cable skidder, tree length or 16, 20-foot lengths coming out to the landing, and then on the landing, they're bucking up the logs and cutting everything to length on the landing. So in a situation like this, you do need a pretty big landing. You see, a lot of times these trees are pulled out tree length or pretty long lengths, and then typically there's a skid steer, and somebody with a chainsaw that cuts everything to length on the landing and then sorts it into the different sorts. Whereas if you look at the picture on the right hand side, this is a cut to length operation. So this operation, the trees are cut to length in the woods. It's a mechanized operation with a processor, and everything's cut to length and then forwarded out in forwarders with bunks, and then decked up on the landing. In these circumstances, you don't need as big of a landing, but just kind of a good visual showing the two different operations there. And then the picture on the left hand, far left hand side, just shows a state land timber sale of a logging road that we had to do, going up a pretty good slope, but we cut and filled the hill, had a nice grade. You know, a lot of times when you do this, you do have a longer road that is built, and it may be more costly to put in a longer road. However, as I mentioned before, having a good road that you can use is a benefit to you as a landowner, and you know, by taking a shortcut going straight up and down the hill, having something that you're scared for dear life to even drive a four-wheeler up and down, much nicer. You know, that's going to cause erosion problems and other things down the road, whereas you can put in a good road and really plan it, it can save a lot of problems down the road. So picking the methods of selling timber, basically just wanted to mention briefly, you know, lump sum versus scaled sale. There's pros and cons to both, you know, and really comes down to what you feel comfortable doing, and what kind of timber sale you're dealing with to really helps make that decision. But as the name implies, lump sum, the purchaser would pay for all or most of the timber up front before anything is cut. Whereas a scaled sale, you would negotiate terms, you know, and put that in the contract. You negotiate a price per product and species and potentially grade. Then it would be scaled either on the landing or back at the mill, and you would be paid according to that, what you agreed on the front end. So kind of two different ways of doing that there. I just showed a picture on here on the far left is here again, a timber sale map. This is very important to accompany the MFL cutting notice and a prospectus to really highlight the area that's to be cut, so prospective buyers can come and take a look at it and really be able to see what's which areas are being cut and what the prescription is in each area. Selecting a logging contractor. So picture on the far left, this is a better picture of a cut to length operation, mechanized operation. This is a track machine. There, some of these machines are wheeled in all different variations. This has a fixed head. There are some dingle heads and all, as I mentioned, all kinds of different variations of mechanized equipment. But this picture would be that type of operation. Whereas on the right hand side is a cable skidder. So basically, the trees are cut by hand. There's a drum on the back of this machine that's pulled out with chokers that are hooked around the trees, and then the tree is pulled to the landing that way. A lot of times in our hilly terrain here in western Wisconsin, this is what is used to pull the trees up out of the hills or down the hills. So that kind of the difference between those two. So as I mentioned earlier, really trying to see what kind of equipment mix fits your project best. Also looking at training of the loggers, you know, going through seeing what kind of training they have, what kind of experience they have, you know, check references, perhaps other landowners that they've worked with, you know, check references, and then proof of insurance is very important, making sure you have that proof of insurance. No different than if you had any other contractor come and working on your house or something, making sure that they're holding that proof of insurance and getting a copy of that beforehand. Really, a lot of this does apply when hiring a forester to a lot of these same things, you know, training, experience, reference checks could apply to hiring that cooperating forester or forestry professional as well. So monitoring the sale, lots of things can happen with logging. So it's very important to be out there checking on things, and things that can be vulnerable. Even the best circumstances, best logger, we get a 5-6 inch rain in the middle of summer when we have logging roads opened up, stuff is going to wash out. So it's good to be out there checking on things. Things we look for here, just some visuals on the left hand side. Residual damage. Are we seeing a lot of this? Is it excessive? Really checking for stuff being damaged, residual. The middle picture, really showing some rutting, compaction concerns, and making sure that this isn't happening, throughout the property, damaging, by doing this, we can damage root systems, and which further down the road can lead to other issues with the remaining trees. So keeping an eye on that. And then the picture on the far right would be a kind of a good example of just the erosion rilling, washouts that happen when things are opened up and we get a rain event. So yeah, like I mentioned earlier, easier to catch, easier to fix things when it's caught early on a job, and that's really the importance of being out monitoring on these sales, and really an important part that the cooperating forester can assist you with. Post-harvest administration. Again, making sure the practice was implemented as prescribed. This picture in the middle shows a crossing that was done, and the crossing was done very well. There were tops and stuff put in to really save the banks. However, at the end of the job, the poles and the tops weren't pulled back out of there, and in essence created a dam and obstructed some of the flow of the water. So this is something, after sale, making sure that these sort of things are pulled out, cleaned out. Just kind of a good example of that. The picture on the far right would be an example that I ran across of it was supposed to be prescribed as a clear cut where everything over 2 inches in diameter was cut. However, when looking at it, clear to see that basically the bigger diameter trees were cut, and many of the smaller diameter, poor formed, poor quality trees that should have been cut as well were left standing. And this was a circumstance, logger had already left, and so then the landowner had to find somebody else to come in and do the work. So it's important, there too, to make sure things are being implemented as prescribed, and ultimately this responsibility does come back, as I mentioned earlier, to you as the landowner if there are issues that we come across. And that's the importance of having a good contract in place with that producer, that then you can hold them accountable and hopefully come back in to fix things up if there were any issues that didn't get cleaned up. So here is the link to the UW Extension Forestry website, and really some great information on timber sale contracts. Highly suggest going through, print off and look at that sample contract, and then also read through some of these clips and different things here, different tabs on timber sale contracts. Really is good information on that. I mentioned some publications that we have. So UW Extension, there's a link on the left-hand side to UW Extension publications. Lots of really good information here as well. Talking about management, different stuff, firewood, even wildlife stuff, herbicides. Lots of really good information on there that you can go through. And then the link on the right would be DNR publications, and that would be the link that I mentioned earlier, the 7 successful steps to successful timber harvest. That publication would be under that link, and I would suggest looking through that. Lauren, I believe we'll be sending a link to following up with or an email, excuse me, with these links that you guys will have access to that then following this meeting. So just to review next steps, find your MFL plan, review it, work with a forestry or cooperating forester or other forestry professional, get something in writing, then contact your tax law forestry specialist, let them know that you have a service agreement, timber sale contract. And yeah, really contact tax law forestry specialists anytime along the way with questions, concerns that pop up. And filing your MFL county cutting notices, and lastly, submitting that MFL cutting report that'll close out the timber sale. So that ends the presentation portion that I have for tonight. I want to give a special thanks to Lauren Larson with UW Extension for assisting with this website and or this webinar and helping facilitate this meeting and everything. Thanks a lot for all your work on this, Lauren. Also want to thank Keith Krajewski, Northwest Tax Law Team Leader, and RJ Wickham, the Forest Tax Law Section Chief, for helping put this presentation together as well. With that, I think we're going to take a little break, right, Lauren, and then come back and what do we think, 5 minutes or so for questions, discussion?
Yeah, let's take a 5-minute break and come back at about 6:51, and then we can start it on the question section. think we'll give it just one more minute, and then anybody who wants to, feel free to unmute and turn your camera on, ask Matt questions. We've got plenty of time. Anybody have some questions for Matt?
This is Ron. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I was just looking at my plan here. It says that mandatory practices of thinning some mature pines and some single tree selection and some hardwoods in 2023. Now you talked about this might take, this whole process might take 2 or 3 years. Does that mean I should get started on getting this process going now, or wait till 2023 and start it?
No, good question, Ron. Yeah, absolutely. Starting now would be good because these things do take time. And, the big idea is we get it contracted no later than the end of 2023. But even if you got it contracted in 2022, like I say, doing a 2-year contract is pretty common. So we could be looking 2024 before that harvest was completed. So yeah, I would definitely suggest starting on it now, and really keep in contact with myself if you're running into any hangups or anything. Keep track of who you've had look at it. Document all that information. These things can be a challenge at times, and all that's helpful when we come together. And in some circumstances, we may have to look at, let's say we get down the road to that 2023 time, and you can't find anybody interested in it. Then we may have to look at other options at that point. And so definitely document who you talk to and start right away on it. Yep, good question.
Okay, thank you. So if I hit stop video, then
Other questions for Matt? There's one in the chat. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I can ask the chat question when you're done.
This is Dave Smith, and we had an area clear cut in, I believe, 2008. And basically they left walnut trees and oak trees, but everything that's growing out there now is basically growing off the stumps, and there's nothing, it doesn't seem like anything new is coming. I'm just curious of what goes on with something like that.
Yeah, good question, Dave. Yeah, I mean, that is an important part of it, is evaluating all these, down the road. And really the part of the job that I enjoy most with this position, I get to see a lot of different stuff cut, and then years down the road, maybe 20, 30, 40, 50 years down the road, seeing what works, what doesn't work. And yeah, in some circumstances, things don't always work exactly as we expected. We've got a lot of, in particular nowadays, I mean, we've got a lot of struggles between deer browse, invasive species. It can really be a struggle to get natural regeneration back. So it's good that you noted that. And yeah, at some point, might be something we could look at some point to potentially see what other options there are to do in there. A lot of times in clear cutting, we do get stump sprouts back, and we expect that, and we can grow halfway decent quality trees from stump sprouts. But I've seen in particular with oak regeneration, in particular, high quality oak sites can be a real challenge to try to regenerate. And particular with the deer browse, I've looked at a number of these that we've tried to do regeneration to get oak back, and most circumstances we have other species coming, but it's more of the shade tolerant, you know, the maples and central hardwoods, you know, such as hickory, hackberry, all kinds of other things coming in, not exactly getting the oak regeneration like we'd like to see. And that's okay too. I mean, as long as we have something coming back, something desirable coming back, that it's not solid invasives. But yeah, good question.
Thank you.
Yep.
There was a question in the chat here from Trisha. It says, if our MFL plan speaks to thinning 18 acres for pines, are we able to harvest black walnut trees separate from the MFL cutting?
Yeah, good question, Trisha. You know, you have to look and see if the walnut is the walnut part of your MFL? Is that included in the MFL contract? It's just not scheduled. Is that what you're asking?
Here, turn this over.
We don't think, we can't find in the MFL plan anything that speaks to black walnut trees, but we just bought it last fall, so we were new to it.
Sure. Yeah, that'd be something that we could definitely review in further detail, looking at, and in some circumstances, you know, yeah, I wouldn't be opposed if there is stuff to do in there. You know, it goes back to, as I mentioned before, you know, landowners' goals and objectives can change, and we can modify, you know, the plans as needed if there is stuff to be done in the walnut. So it, you know, it'd be something to look at, I guess, Trisha, would be the thing, I guess. And if in fact there's some stuff that could be thinned in there, yeah, perhaps we could put it together with the pine as well. Are you guys working with anybody on the pine cut, Trisha?
Not yet. No, we are gonna
Okay.
attend this tonight and then start and reach out.
And there again, you know, if you're working with a cooperating forester or you know, other forestry professional, mention that to them too. They can look at it and assess it.
Okay.
You know, get as much of that information, and if needed, you know, I could come out, take a look if there are any questions on that, being it's not in the plan and stuff. But yeah, whoever you end up working with, you know, first,
Hold on, hold on.
I'll mention that to them.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions for Matt?
One thing, I guess I'll go in a little more detail. I didn't really explain it, but just kind of to mention, you know, within cooperating forester program, I mentioned that there's industrial foresters and private foresters, and just so you know the difference, you know, industrial forester works for in most cases they're a timber buyer or procurement forester for a particular mill, whereas a private forester a lot of times independent from that mill. So just I wanted to mention that when you're looking through that list, you know, you'll see some of the cooperating foresters tied to a particular mill, and those would be the industrial foresters. And there again, there's no right or wrong way which way you want to go about doing it. Typically, the industrial foresters, if they're going to get involved, you know, that project, the wood's going to go to their mill, so then you wouldn't be looking at, you know, potentially marking it and putting it out for bids. If you wanted to go that route, where you had an independent market and then put it out for bids, that's where you'd want to look at the private foresters. and then, send it out to the different industrial foresters at that point. So I just wanted to mention that when you're looking through that, both are on the cooperating forester list, and both are good to work with. And like I say, no right or wrong way which way you want to go, just that there is a difference there. So.
Thanks for that, Matt.
Yep.
If there aren't any other questions, we can end now. Just want to give folks one more chance really quickly if there are questions that have come up. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us this evening. Be on the lookout for an email sometime probably early next week. I'll send the link to this recording and send the PowerPoint as well, which has links within it that you can click on. Some of the things that Matt mentioned about the UW Extension site for publications and also the DNR site for publications. Those links will be in there. And I'll put Matt's contact information in that email. So be on the lookout for that. And if there are any questions, feel free to reach out to one of us. Otherwise, have a good night. Thanks for joining.